The chamber went silent the moment the lights dimmed to red. 7 thrones circled the room like teeth around a wound, and at the center of them stood one woman, alone, facing judges who had already decided her fate before she opened her mouth. Elena Reyes did not flinch. She had commanded starships through debris fields and watched good men die under her orders. She would not let a room full of aliens see her hands shake. "Ambassador Reyes," said the council speaker, a tall insectoid being named Vorenth Alskaru. His voice translated into flat, mechanical calm. "You have heard the charges. Do you wish to respond before the vote is finalized?" Elena looked up at the massive holographic display behind him, sensor footage of the Meridian's Hope, humanity's newest colony vessel, drifting near a disputed border sector. Then a flash, an explosion that lit up half the display. Readings that, according to the Keith Directorate's testimony, matched an experimental weapons signature. "That footage is wrong," Elena said. "I've reviewed the flight logs myself. The Meridian's Hope had no weapons capability. It was a colony ship, families, children, not a warship." "And yet," rumbled a heavy voice from the Keith delegate, a broad reptilian figure whose scales caught the red light like wet stone, "an entire outpost in that sector reported catastrophic sensor anomalies within the hour. Radiation signatures inconsistent with any known drive system. Only your species had been in that region in the past standard month." "Then investigate it properly," Elena said, her voice rising despite herself. "Don't banish an entire civilization over a footnote in a sensor log." But she already knew. She had known from the moment she walked into this chamber that the outcome had been written long before she arrived. 60 years. That was how long humanity had been part of galactic society. A blink of an eye to species that measured their history in millennia. Long enough to be useful, not long enough to be trusted. The vote came fast, 7 hands rising in near-perfect unison, and Vorenth's mandibles clicked together in what might have been reluctance, though no one else in the chamber seemed to notice. "By unanimous decision," the speaker announced, "the species-designated humanity is hereby banished from council space. All vessels bearing human registry are to withdraw beyond the perimeter within 30 standard days. Technology exchange is suspended indefinitely. Diplomatic contact is revoked." Elena stood very still. Somewhere behind her ribs, something cracked, quiet and permanent. "You're making a mistake," she said. Not loud, not pleading, just certain, the way she might report an engine failure. "One day you're going to need us. And when that day comes, I hope you remember this room." No one answered her. 2 council guards, tall and silver-armored, stepped forward to escort her out, their grip firm on her arms, though she had made no move to resist. As they turned her toward the doors, she caught one last look at the speaker. Vorenth Alskaru was watching her leave, and for just a fraction of a second, his composed alien face did something that no diplomatic mask should have allowed. He looked afraid. Not of her, of something else. Something he wasn't saying. Elena filed the look away the way she filed away every strange detail in her long career, a habit that had kept her alive more than once, and let the guards walk her out of the chamber that had just ended humanity's brief, uneasy membership among the stars. 3 hours later, in the observation lounge of the human delegation ship Ithaca, Elena stood with a glass of water she hadn't touched, watching Earth's small, distant service fleet begin its slow, humiliating retreat toward the perimeter. Around her, junior staff moved in stunned silence, packing files, encrypting records, trying not to look like people whose entire civilization had just been publicly shamed in front of the galaxy. Her comms officer, a young man named Devlin, approached carefully. "Ma'am, Captain Ode is requesting a channel. Says it's urgent." Elena nodded and stepped into the small communications alcove. Marcus Ode's face appeared on the screen, sharp-jawed and tired, still in his flight suit from a routine border patrol he'd been running when the verdict came down. "Elena," he said, skipping rank entirely, which told her how serious this was. "I need you to hear something before you file your final report." "Go ahead." I was in that border sector 4 days before the Meridian's Hope supposedly triggered a weapons event, Marcus said. I ran a full sweep, full eye. There was nothing there. No debris, no drive signatures, nothing that would explain what they showed the Council. Elena's grip tightened slightly on the edge of the console. You're saying the footage was fabricated. I'm saying I don't know what I'm looking at anymore, Marcus said. And I don't like coincidences, especially not ones that end with humanity thrown out of Council space over evidence nobody let us independently verify. Before Elena could respond, the ship's alert system chimed, low and insistent. Not an emergency klaxon, just a status update flagged for her personal attention. She glanced at the secondary display and frowned. Devlin, put this through, she said. A dry official Council communique scrolled across the screen. The kind of routine border status update humanity still received automatically, a courtesy that would presumably end within the month along with everything else. It was a report on Outpost Farron 9, a small Council listening station near the same disputed sector where the Meridian's Hope incident had supposedly occurred. Status: no response. Last telemetry, 0347, standard. Elena read it twice. That's strange, she murmured. What is? Marcus asked. Farron 9 isn't reporting damage or an attack or a distress signal, Elena said slowly, scrolling through the sparse data. It's just gone. No wreckage, no debris field, no final transmission except routine telemetry, and then nothing. Like it was never there. On the screen, Marcus's expression shifted, the exhaustion draining out of his face and something colder taking its place. Elena, that's not possible. A station that size doesn't just vanish, even a full destruction leaves something behind. Debris, radiation, a distress beacon, anything. I know, Elena said. And for the first time since the verdict, the fear in her voice wasn't about humanity's exile. It was about something bigger, something she couldn't yet name, spreading quietly in the dark just beyond the edge of everything the Council thought it understood. Outside the viewport, Earth's fleet continued its slow retreat, small and stubborn against the vastness of space, carrying a species that had just been told it wasn't welcome among the stars. Neither of them knew yet that Farron 9 was only the first. 3 weeks after the verdict, Earth built a wall no one could see. It wasn't made of steel or shields. It was made of silence, the sudden, total absence of a galaxy that had, for 60 years, hummed constantly at the edges of human life. No trade pings from Council markets, no shared star charts, no routine diplomatic chatter. Just the dark, and the sound of humanity's own voice, echoing back at itself. Dr. Priya Nakamura sat in a cramped office at the Solari Linguistics Institute, surrounded by 3 monitors of untranslated Council transmissions she had pulled before the final blackout, and told herself for the 4th time that night that she was not obsessing. She was working. The knock on her door made her jump anyway. You're still here, said Marcus Ode, letting himself in without waiting for an answer. He'd traded his flight suit for civilian clothes that didn't quite fit him anymore, the posture of a man who spent more time in a cockpit than anywhere else. It's almost 300. You're one to talk, Priya said, not looking up. Aren't you supposed to be commanding a fleet that technically isn't allowed near the perimeter anymore? I'm commanding a fleet that's parked exactly where our own government told it to park, Marcus said, dropping into the chair across from her. Which doesn't mean I have to like watching the border on sensors we're only allowed to point one direction. Priya finally looked up. There was something in his face she recognized. The specific, quiet anger of someone who had been lied to and hadn't yet decided what to do about it. You still think the weapons test was staged? I know what I saw in that sector, Marcus said. Or didn't see. And I know Farron 9 isn't the only thing that's gone dark since the trial. Priya's stomach tightened. How many? Officially, 2 more outposts and a small research colony, Marcus said. Unofficially, based on chatter, our old contacts are still leaking us before the blackout finishes closing. 5, maybe 6. All near the border. All vanished the same way. No wreckage, no distress call, just gone. That's not possible, Priya said automatically, and hated how thin it sounded even as she said it. That's what I keep hearing, Marcus said. from everyone, including myself. Priya turned back to her monitors, pulling up a file she'd been avoiding for days, a garbled transmission fragment, forwarded through an old diplomatic backchannel by a source she didn't fully trust. It had been recorded moments before the newest colony, a mining settlement called Doris Reach, had gone silent for good. "I want you to hear something," she said, and played it, static mostly, then buried under the noise a voice, flat, layered, repeating the same short phrase over and over in a cadence that made the hair on Marcus's arms stand up. "That's not a council language," Marcus said slowly. "That's not any language I recognize." "That's because it isn't alien," Priya said. "I've run it through every translation matrix we have. It doesn't match Kaith, Ashvale, Rensur, any of them. But the phonetic structure, the rhythm of it, matches something human. An old signal protocol. Experimental. I found a fragment reference to it in a declassified research index from 20 years ago." Marcus straightened. "Which project?" "It's called Project Anchor," Priya said. "There's almost nothing on it. Funding cut off abruptly 2 decades back. Lead researcher listed as Dr. Simon Achebe. Status: missing, presumed dead, following the loss of an experimental vessel with full crew. And now a phrase built on his research is showing up at the site of a vanishing alien colony," Marcus said. "That's not a coincidence." "No," Priya said quietly. "It isn't. Halfway across the galaxy, in a cramped archive chamber buried 3 levels beneath the Council's central complex, Vorenth Alskaru worked alone, moving through classified files with the careful, practiced silence of someone who had spent his entire career being underestimated. He was not important. That was the point of him. A mid-tier archivist, useful for retrieving old records and staying quiet in meetings, easy to overlook in a chamber full of ambassadors and generals. No one had questioned why he stayed late so often since the human trial. No one had thought to ask what he was looking for. He found it 3 hours before dawn cycle, a sealed operational log from the Ashcoil Enclave, the Council's shadow military arm, dated 4 days before the Meridian's Hope incident. He should not have had access to it. He accessed it anyway. The log detailed a classified deployment near the same border sector, weeks before the alleged human weapons test. An Ashcoil vessel, equipped with experimental disruption technology, conducting an unsanctioned field trial, the kind of trial that could, under the right conditions, produce sensor anomalies that looked remarkably like an unauthorized weapon discharge. Vorenth read it twice, then a third time, his hands trembling slightly against the console. The evidence used to banish an entire species from galactic civilization had not come from the humans at all. It had come from the Council's own military, testing something they didn't want anyone to know they had. And someone, somewhere near the top of the Ashcoil command structure, had made certain the blame landed somewhere convenient, on a species with no seat at the table to defend itself. He thought of Elena Reyes standing alone in that chamber, refusing to let her voice shake even as 7 votes rose against her, and felt something in his chest that his species did not have a clean word for, a mixture of shame and obligation that made his carapace itch. He was still staring at the file, trying to decide what a low-ranking archivist could possibly do with proof that could get him executed for treason, when the alert chimed. Not the routine alert he half expected. An emergency broadcast, council-wide, priority red. Vorenth pulled it up with shaking claws and the words on the screen stopped his breath entirely. Colony world Thren Vale, population estimated at 400,000, had gone dark exactly as the outposts before it. No wreckage, no distress call, no warning. But this time, in the final seconds before all telemetry ceased, the colony's automated relay had captured something. A signal, transmitted from directly above the planet, in the same strange layered cadence Priya Nakamura was, at that very moment, trying to decode a galaxy away. Vorenth stared at the transcript the translation matrix had struggled to render, watching the same 6 words scroll across his screen, over and over, patient and utterly without mercy. We are still counting. Somewhere above him in the grand chamber where humanity had been condemned 3 weeks earlier, Alarms were beginning to sound, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Vorinth Alskaru understood, with total certainty, that the Council had made a catastrophic mistake it was only just beginning to comprehend. The message arrived hidden inside a shipment of quarantined botanical samples, smuggled across the perimeter by a cargo hauler who had no idea what he was carrying. Elena Reyes found it because she'd made a habit since the trial of personally inspecting every piece of cargo that crossed into Sol space, a paranoid ritual her staff called it, though none of them argued with her about it anymore. Buried inside a false-bottomed sample case was a single encrypted data chip and a note in careful, formal council script that took her translator 3 tries to render correctly. Ambassador Reyes, what was done to your people was not justice. I have proof. I am risking everything to send it. Please, believe what you find, even if you cannot yet believe me. VAK. Her hands were steady as she opened the file. They stopped being steady about 4 minutes in. The Ashcoil Enclave's operational logs. The unsanctioned weapons trial. The timeline that placed the real cause of the border anomaly weeks before the Meridian's Hope had even entered the sector. Elena read it 3 times, feeling something cold and enormous settle into her chest. Not surprise exactly. She had known in the marrow of her bones that the verdict had been wrong, but knowing and holding proof were very different kinds of weight. She called Marcus within the hour. He's right, Marcus said, after reading the file twice on his own end, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. We were framed, an entire species banished because some council faction wanted to field test a weapon without accountability and needed someone else to take the blame. There's more, Elena said. This isn't just about clearing our name anymore, Marcus. Priya's been trying to reach me for 2 days. She says the vanishing colonies aren't random. She thinks they're connected to something called Project Anchor. Achebe's old program, Marcus said grimly. Priya briefed me. Whatever's happening out there, it's leaving human fingerprints on it. And nobody in this system can explain how. Then we need her here, Elena said. All of it. Together. Because I don't think the Council banishing us was the disaster, Marcus. I think it might have been the only thing that's kept us alive. Priya arrived at the Sol Defense Command Center 2 days later, exhausted, wired on too much coffee, and carrying a tablet full of data she was almost afraid to present. She stood in front of Elena, Marcus, and a small circle of trusted officials in a windowless briefing room and forced herself to start at the beginning. Project Anchor was shut down 20 years ago after an experimental deep space vessel, the Halcyon, vanished during a test flight, Priya said. Officially, it was ruled a catastrophic engine failure. Dr. Simon Achebe, the lead researcher, was never found. His work was sealed, and the program was defunded within a year. And now his research protocol is showing up at the site of vanishing Council worlds, Marcus said. Not just showing up, Priya said, pulling up the waveform on the room's central display. Repeating, in the exact same structure every time moments before a system goes dark. I've cross-referenced 6 incidents now. The phrase is identical down to the microsecond timing. She hesitated. There's something else. I mapped the locations of every vanished outpost colony and now, as of 6 hours ago, an entire shipping lane. The display shifted, showing a slowly expanding region of space along the Council's border, marked in flickering red. It's not random, Priya said quietly. It's spreading. Consistently, in a widening pattern, and it started almost exactly where the Meridian's Hope incident supposedly took place. The room went very still. You're saying whatever is doing this, Elena said slowly, started at the same place, the same time, as the fabricated weapons test that got us banished. I'm saying I don't think that's a coincidence anymore, Priya said. I think the Ashcoil Enclave's weapons trial didn't just create a convenient excuse to blame humanity. I think it woke something up. Marcus leaned forward, jaw tight. Woke what up? I don't know, Priya admitted, but whatever it is, it's using a communication structure built on human research that's supposed to be 20 years dead. That's not a coincidence I can explain with linguistics alone. Elena stared at the spreading red boundary on the map, feeling the shape of something vast and patient just beginning to reveal itself, far larger than a border dispute, far larger than a single unjust trial. "Get me everything on the Halcyon," she said. "Every file, every name, every survivor's family we can find. If this started with Achebe's research, we need to understand what he actually built, before whatever's out there finishes what it started." It was Marcus who caught the anomaly 2 days later, alone on the bridge of his flagship during the long dead hours of third shift, staring at long-range sensor sweeps he wasn't technically cleared to be running. At first he thought it was a sensor glitch, a faint, rippling distortion at the very edge of his ship's detection range, far beyond the perimeter in Council space humanity was no longer permitted to monitor. He adjusted the array twice, expecting the reading to resolve into noise. It didn't. It sharpened. A slow, vast disturbance in space itself, moving with unmistakable deliberation, swallowing star systems in a pattern too precise to be natural and too enormous to be anything humanity possessed the power to stop. He pulled up the full trajectory data with hands that had gone suddenly cold, cross-referencing it against every colony, outpost, and vanished world Priya had catalogued. The pattern matched perfectly, and it was accelerating. Marcus was still staring at the projection, trying to calculate how long the Council's core worlds had left before the boundary reached them, when his communications console lit up with an emergency channel he hadn't used in 3 weeks. A direct line to Elena flagged urgent. He opened it and Priya's voice came through instead, breathless, stripped of its usual careful precision. "Marcus, I finished the translation. The full phrase, not just the fragment. I need you to hear this before Earth loses contact with the border entirely, because I don't think we have much time left to understand what's coming." On the display beside her, the 6 words scrolled up one final time. No longer garbled, no longer uncertain, clean, deliberate, and utterly without warmth. "We are still counting. Humanity is not among them." Marcus stared at the screen, at the slow, terrible shape spreading across the projection beside it, and understood, with sudden and complete certainty, that whatever was erasing the galaxy one world at a time had just told them something no one on Earth was prepared to hear. It knew exactly who humanity was, and for reasons no one yet understood, it had chosen, so far, to leave them alone. The signal repeated for 6 hours before anyone was brave enough to answer it. Marcus stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Odyssey, watching the rippling boundary crawl closer across every long-range display, and made the decision that would end his career if Earth's government ever found out about it before he was ready to tell them. "Open a channel," he said. "Direct, tight beam, toward the source." His communications officer hesitated. "Sir, we're not authorized to transmit beyond the perimeter. If the Council detects an unauthorized human broadcast—" "The Council isn't the one erasing star systems," Marcus said. "Open it." The channel opened into static, then silence. Then, after nearly a full minute, that same slow, layered voice returned. Not garbled this time, but clear, resolving itself as though it had been waiting, patiently, for someone to finally have the courage to listen. "Anchor signature confirmed, kin marker present, query. Are you the inheritors?" Marcus felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. "This is Captain Marcus Ode, Earth Fleet Vessel Odyssey. I don't understand your question. Who are you? What are you doing to these systems?" A long pause, then, "We are the Wardens. We are correcting an unfinished accounting. Kin marker detected in your species architecture. You are not among those to be counted. You may proceed unharmed. All others near this boundary will be recovered." "Recovered," Marcus repeated. "You mean erased?" "Recovered," the voice said again, with what almost sounded like patience, or perhaps simple indifference to the distinction. "Nothing is lost that is not first understood." The channel went dead. Marcus stood frozen for a long moment before turning to his XO. "Get Elena on a secure line. Now, and pull everything we have on the word Wardens, Council records, old human deep space surveys, anything." There was nothing. Not a single reference, anywhere in human or Council archives, to anything called the Wardens. Which meant, Marcus realized with a slow, sinking dread that whatever they were old enough and patient enough to have gone entirely unnoticed until now. Vorinth Alskaru had not slept in 3 days when he finally found the buried record that explained everything. He worked from a private terminal in the lowest sub-level of the archive, half certain by now that Ashcoil security had already flagged his access patterns, moving as fast as his shaking claws allowed. The file he found was ancient, corrupted in places, classified under a clearance level so old the system nearly refused to open it at all. A founding-era record, dated to the earliest days of the Council itself, sealed for over 60,000 standard years. It was not, as he had expected, a technical specification. It was a confession, recorded by one of the Council's original founders in a dialect so old the translation matrix struggled with half the syntax, and what it described made Vorinth's chest tighten with something close to physical pain. The Council's founding species had not built the galaxy's hyperlane infrastructure. They had inherited it, taken it, in truth, from a prior civilization that had spanned a significant portion of the galaxy long before any of the current Council species had left their homeworlds. A civilization the founders had, through war, sabotage, and slow attrition, systematically annihilated in order to claim their infrastructure, their territory, their technology, for themselves. The record called them, in a term the Matrix rendered clumsily, the architects. And it described in careful clinical detail a contingency the architects had built into their remaining systems before the end. Automated custodians, designed to reactivate if the infrastructure they'd built was ever misused by whoever came to occupy it. Custodians tasked with one function, to determine eventually whether their inheritors had become worthy of what they'd taken, or whether it needed to be reclaimed. The wardens. Vorinth sat back from the terminal, his vision swimming, and understood all at once why the erasure had begun exactly where it did, at the site of the Ashcoil Enclave's illegal weapons trial, which had, by pure catastrophic chance, triggered some dormant sensor deep in the architect's remaining infrastructure, and woken something that had been sleeping since before any Council species had learned to build a starship. He also understood with a jolt that felt like ice water down his spine why humanity had been spared. He pulled every fragment of Project Anchor data the Council had ever intercepted, cross-referencing it desperately against the founding record, and found it, buried in a footnote about the architects' final acts before their extinction. A genetic and technological marker, deliberately embedded in salvage left scattered across the galaxy, meant to identify whichever species eventually proved itself capable of finding that salvage without exploiting it for conquest. Humanity had found a fragment of it 20 years ago, in the form of a derelict vessel Dr. Simon Achebe had stumbled across during an unauthorized deep space survey. Project Anchor hadn't been a weapons program at all. It had been humanity, without knowing it, being tested and passing. Vorinth was still staring at the record, trying to decide what a single terrified archivist could possibly do with knowledge this dangerous, when the door to the archive chamber slid open behind him. He turned and his heart seized. His hearts. 2 Ashcoil security officers stood in the doorway, weapons already raised, their commander's voice flat and final behind them. Vorinth Alskaru, you are in violation of Council Security Protocol 17 Alpha. Step away from the terminal. Across the galaxy, on a Council world she had not been permitted to leave, Elena Reyes was reviewing Marcus's transmission log for the 4th time when her own door chimed. Not the polite formal request of a diplomatic visit, but the sharp official signal of Council security. She opened it to find 3 armed officers and a junior Ashcoil officer whose face was carefully, deliberately blank. Ambassador Reyes, you're to come with us. On what authority? Elena said, standing slowly, every instinct honed over decades of command screaming at her that something had gone very wrong very quickly. There's been a security breach implicating classified Ashcoil records, the officer said. Your name has come up in the associated communications. Elena's mind raced through everything she knew, the smuggled data chip, the note signed VAK, and the proof that had been risked at extraordinary cost to reach her. If they knew about the leak, they knew who had sent it. Where is Vorinth Alskaru? She asked, keeping her voice level with an effort that cost her everything she had. The officer's blank expression didn't change. "That is not your concern, Ambassador. You will come with us now." Behind her, on the small terminal she hadn't managed to shut down in time, Marcus's last transmission still glowed on the screen. The words of something ancient and patient, calling itself the Wardens, telling humanity it had been spared for reasons no one yet understood, while the rest of the galaxy it had abandoned began to vanish, one world at a time, into the dark. Elena let herself be led out into the corridor, already calculating, already planning, refusing to let herself believe that this was how it ended, not with the truth exposed but buried again, along with everyone brave enough to have found it. The derelict drifted at the exact center of the anomaly, half swallowed by the same rippling distortion that had consumed 6 colonies and counting, and it was, impossibly, still broadcasting a heartbeat. Marcus stood on the Odyssey's bridge, staring at the structure his sensors had found buried in the leading edge of the boundary, an ancient fused mass of alien architecture and something unmistakably human, twisted together like scar tissue grown around a wound. Life signs, faint but present. One human signature. 20 years dead according to every record on file. "That's not possible," his XO said quietly. "Nothing about the last month has been possible," Marcus said. "Prep a shuttle. I'm going in." They found Dr. Simon Achebe suspended in the derelict's core, fused into systems that had clearly kept him alive far longer than any human body should have survived. Aged, hollowed out, but unmistakably, achingly alive, his eyes opening slowly as the shuttle's lights swept over him for the first time in 2 decades. "You found it," Achebe rasped, his voice cracked from disuse. "The marker. You found the marker." "Dr. Achebe," Marcus said carefully, kneeling beside him. "We need to know everything. What is this place? What are the Wardens? Why does humanity matter to them?" Achebe's laugh was thin and painful. "Project Anchor was never a weapons program. I found this vessel 20 years ago on an unauthorized survey, half dead even then, ancient beyond anything the Council ever built. It was speaking, not words, patterns. I spent months learning to answer, and when I finally did, it did something I never expected." He gestured weakly at his own fused, augmented body. "It marked me, recognized something in human genetics, a kind of resilience, an aversion to total conquest, that its makers built their entire final judgment around. I didn't build a weapon, Captain. I answered a question, and the answer got embedded in every human being who shares blood with the crew that came after me." "What question?" Marcus asked. "Whether we'd take what wasn't ours and burn everything behind us to keep it," Achebe said. "Like the Council's founders did to the architects who built all of this. The Wardens were left behind to watch and wait and eventually judge whoever came to occupy what was stolen. They're not weapons. They're conscience, given a very long memory and no patience left." Marcus felt something settle cold and heavy in his chest. "And now they've decided the Council failed that judgment. The trial started it," Achebe whispered. "The illegal weapons test near the border wasn't just an excuse to blame you. It disturbed something the architects buried in that sector specifically to be left alone. It woke the Wardens early, before their long dormancy cycle was meant to end. And once awake, they don't stop counting until the accounting is finished." "How do we stop it?" Achebe's ravaged face turned toward him, something like hope flickering behind the exhaustion. "You don't stop it, Captain. You answer it, same as I did. It's still asking a question. Nobody's tried answering back." Elena Reyes sat in a cell 3 levels beneath the Ashcoil Enclave's central command, watching a wall chronometer count down toward a tribunal that would very likely be the last official proceeding of her life, when the door opened without warning. Not guards. Forenth moving fast, one arm cradling a small data terminal against his chest, his usual careful composure entirely gone. "We don't have much time," he said, keying open her cell with credentials she suspected he'd stolen at enormous personal risk. "They intend to make both of us disappear quietly. No trial, no record, Then we stop being quiet, Elena said. Vorinth's mandibles clicked in something that might have been grim agreement. I have the founding record. The truth about the architects, the wardens, everything the council has hidden for 60,000 years, and proof the Ashcoil Enclave staged the incident that got your people banished. If I broadcast it now, to every species in the coalition simultaneously, they can't bury it again. Not with this many worlds already watching their leaders vanish along with everyone else. They'll kill you for it, Elena said. They may kill me either way, Vorinth said quietly. I would rather it mean something. Elena looked at him, this small, unremarkable archivist who had risked everything over and over for a species that wasn't even his own, and felt something fierce and grateful rise in her chest. Then let's make it count. They reached the archive's central relay array 11 minutes before Ashcoil security caught up with them, Vorinth's claws flying across the console as alarms began sounding through the corridors outside. He initiated the broadcast with seconds to spare, the founding record and the falsified trial evidence flooding every council channel, every governmental network, every public relay across the coalition, all at once, impossible to contain or deny. The galaxy learned, in the space of a single transmission, that its oldest civilization had built its entire empire on annihilation, and that it had condemned an innocent species to protect that secret. Chaos erupted almost instantly. Governments fractured. Ashcoil officials scrambled to control a narrative that had already outrun them. And somewhere above the archive, council sensors picked up the anomaly's leading edge, crossing into the outer boundary of the council's own homeworld system, less than a day from its capital. Elena was still watching the broadcast ripple outward across 1,000 panicked channels when her private comm crackled to life with Marcus's voice, tight with urgency and something that sounded almost like resolve. Elena, I found a Chebe. I know what the wardens are and I know what they want. It's not destruction, it's an answer. And I don't think anyone's ever actually tried giving them one. Marcus, what are you planning? The only thing left to try, Marcus said. I'm taking the fleet in, not to fight, to talk, the same way a Chebe did 20 years ago, except this time on humanity's terms, in full view of everyone who exiled us. Marcus, that's insane. You have no idea if... I know we're out of time, Marcus said. The boundary reaches the council's capital in under a day. If nobody answers before then, there won't be anyone left to argue with. The channel cut before she could stop him. Elena stood in the wrecked archive, alarms still blaring around her, and watched on a secondary display as council sensors picked up an entire human fleet, outdated, quarantined, dismissed as no threat to anyone, altering course toward the heart of the anomaly. She watched the fleet's transponders blink steadily across the boundary line, and then, exactly like every colony, outpost, and world before it, she watched every single signal flicker once like static catching on a dying signal and vanish. There was no impact, no violence, no sensation of dying at all. One moment Marcus stood on the bridge of the Odyssey, watching the rippling boundaries swallow his ship whole. The next, the Odyssey hung suspended in a vast, silent, impossible space. Not destroyed, not damaged, simply elsewhere, surrounded by the faint ghostly outlines of 6 other vessels and structures Marcus recognized with a jolt. Farron 9, Doris Reach, Thren Vale. Every world the wardens had recovered, drifting together in careful, deliberate stasis, intact, untouched, waiting. They're not gone, Marcus breathed, staring at the readings. They're all still here. A voice answered him, the same slow, layered cadence from before, resonating through the Odyssey's hull itself rather than through any conventional channel. Nothing recovered is destroyed. You asked to be heard. State your answer. Marcus stood very still, thinking of Achebe's ravaged, fused body, of Elena standing alone in a council chamber, refusing to let her voice shake, of every human who had ever chosen, against every instinct toward fear and self-preservation, to build something instead of burning it. You're asking whether we'd become what your maker's enemies became, Marcus said slowly. Whether we'd take what isn't ours and destroy everything behind us to keep it. Confirm. Then here's your answer, Marcus said, and nodded to his communications officer, who transmitted the file they had prepared in desperate, hurried silence during the final hours before the boundary reached them. Humanity's own history, raw and unfiltered. Not curated triumphs. Every failure alongside every recovery. Every war humanity had fought against itself. Every near extinction it had clawed back from. Every time it had chosen, at the very last possible moment, to build a bridge instead of a wall. The silence that followed stretched long enough that Marcus began to wonder if he had misunderstood everything. If the wardens required something cleaner, something more absolute than a species' messy, imperfect record of almost failure and hard-won restraint. Then slowly, the vast structures around them began to shift. Accounting suspended, the voice said, and for the first time something in its endless, patient cadence sounded almost like relief. Marker confirmed. Inheritance acknowledged. Recovery reversed. Around the Odyssey, the suspended worlds began to fade. Not into nothing, but outward, back toward the coordinates they had vanished from, restored exactly as they had been left, down to the last uninterrupted second. On Thren Vale, 400,000 colonists who had simply blinked out of existence 6 days earlier would blink back into it, disoriented but entirely, miraculously whole.